Hello and welcome to another review of a film that I've seen on Mubi. This time I'm reviewing the documentary Free Chol Lee, directed by Julie Ha and Eugene. So this is an interesting and important documentary, I think, and it makes a valuable contribution to the current debate and exposing of institutional racism. The documentary does follow a fairly conventional documentary format, but I was slightly surprised by what actually happens in the documentary because Chol Lee is wrongly convicted for a murder. That seems clear. But the reasons for the wrongful conviction are not fully established until well into the documentary. So it felt like the documentary was assuming that I already knew and that I already believed that Chol Lee was innocent. However, we are given some very clear facts about the fact that he had a gun and that he accidentally fired it in his bedroom, and that we know that he murdered another inmate when he was in prison. And for me, there was always a little question as to whether he possibly did it. I was left feeling with something of an ambiguity around his innocence. So it was about 50 minutes into the film where we get the hard evidence around the ballistics and the reliability of the witnesses and the shoddy work of the police. So when the jury concludes that the evidence didn't show beyond reasonable doubt that he committed this original murder, that is believable and clear. Now, I didn't know Chol Lee's story before seeing this documentary, so I would have liked the evidence to be earlier. It feels like if this documentary was following conventions, it would have got me on Chol Lee's side, clearly from the start of the film. And I don't know whether the film was just somewhat sloppy or whether this was a deliberate decision on the part of the documentary makers. I wasn't really certain whether the documentary is badly made or whether it's quite subtle in doing something other than just highlighting the wrongful conviction. I think there is a lot more in this film than just the issue of Chol Lee being wrongfully convicted. The film is as much about the movement, the mobilization of the Korean community finding a voice rather than the particular circumstances of this wrongful conviction. And whether he was guilty or not, from a human perspective, I started to find it easy to have compassion for him. He wasn't necessarily a likable character, but I did feel sorry from a kind of humanity point of view about the way prisoners are treated in prison, for example. And we really see that the system certainly did nothing to help him. If anything, it did a lot to kind of make his problems worse. The film is also really good about highlighting institutional racism and the assumptions that can lie behind the police work and society's view of a particular group of people. That shocking moment when we see the mugshot file and it's got a really kind of stereotypical racist picture of a Chinese type illustration on the front. So the ambiguity that I felt about his innocence, I wonder whether that is deliberate or whether I missed something or whether the film just isn't quite edited in a way that establishes early on that he is innocent. I'm really not sure what the answer to that question is, but the documentary is interesting due to this aspect because it did catch me a little bit by surprise. It wasn't quite giving me what I would have expected a conventional documentary around a miscarriage of justice to give me. I was a bit surprised when the first murder charge is thrown out. It takes a while for the documentary to clarify the situation with regard to the second murder. After all, he's been given the death penalty for that second murder, and yet he's released. And I was thinking, how could he be released when he's on death row? That this isn't really explained until later. So it just doesn't feel as tight as it could be in terms of presenting the facts. Overall, I think the facts of this case are interesting. I didn't know about it, and so the documentary definitely serves a useful purpose in terms of exposing Chol Lee's story and the issues that it raised. As I say, the film feels a bit sloppy and left me with an ambiguity with regard to his innocence until later in the film. I do think this documentary is important and well worth watching. especially in terms of highlighting the appalling institutional racism and the lack of compassion that the system shows someone like Chol Soo-lee. I thought it was really interesting that he became a symbol to the Korean American community, yet he could never quite live up to what he represented for that community. And to me, this feels like a key point of the film rather than the circumstances of the particular miscarriage of justice in this case. So in conclusion, I do recommend this documentary, even though I'm a little bit ambivalent to it in terms of its handling of the actual facts of the case. Next, and I say this with a little bit of trepidation, I'll be reviewing The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper. See you next time.